He says, what bait you talking about? And then John says, man, that Divin bait he's got. She says, y'all got to build that. And so I went out that afternoon and started building what became DB3s.
Hey everybody, it's Terry Battisti with the Bass Fishing Archives, and I'm sitting here down in Winter Haven, Florida, next to probably one of the biggest legends in crankbait history, Lee Sisson. Lee, how you doing this morning?
I'm doing good. I like the way you introduced that too.
Thank you.
I mean, none of it's true, but it sounds good.
Yeah, so, I mean, we're down here in your, well, not your home state because you're from Louisiana.
That's right.
But
I've lived 2/3 of my life here, so it's just almost my home state.
Yeah. So, I mean, we all know how you got here, I think. You came down here to work for Jim, but can you tell us how the heck did you get to work for Jim?
I was running a recreation. I just graduated from college. I was running a recreation complex in Baton Rouge. And one of the programs I started was, and this was back in the early 70s, was get kids hooked on fishing, not drugs. And it was a way to, my vision of it was going to be these kids coming in and we'd build spinner baits, or we'd wrap a rod, or we'd pour some worms, just some little dinky stuff. Well, I started accusing all the parents of renting kids so they could come to the class because I had all these real fishermen that and we'd show some movies and did all that kind of stuff. And one of the things I started just fooling with building lures, although I had started a little bit of that when I was in college, but and I got into it more and more. One of the things I did, when I was running the recreation complex, we had one of the programs we had was ceramics, and the ceramics teachers, they had this it was an iridescent kind of powder that they would put on the ceramics.
Yeah.
Well, I looked at that and said, man, if we could get that on a fishing lure,
look out.
That would be really pretty. And so I worked a way to get that into the paints and get it to work. And so when this friend of mine that worked at a store, he sent some of this stuff to Bagley's, and I was doing some of the, back then you had a coach dog, and you had a black and pearl, and you had a black and chartreuse, but pretty basic colors.
Yeah.
And I had started painting one. I was painting one like a little brim, and at Bagley's it became late spring brim when I went there. But I was doing it with the iridescent powders and things. This guy sent some of these things to Bagley's, or to Jim, and Jim was coming in town to do a in-store promotion, and he talked to this fellow friend of mine and said, can we get together? So this guy calls me in, and man, I'm all excited. He says, Jim wants to talk to you. And we go in and we talk. Jim and I kind of go in the back at the store, and we talk about 10 minutes. And Jim says, you want to go to work for me? And I pick myself up and brush myself off and go, yeah. And he says, don't you need to talk to your wife? And I said, no. Because I had been kidding my parents and my wife about moving to Winter Haven, never believing that for an instant that I'd ever move there. But,
right.
That was, everybody has dreams, and that was something that I thought about.
Yeah. And
then he says, we talked a little bit more. He says, how much do you make? And I told him. He says, I'll double it. I picked myself up off the ground again.
Yep.
And I don't need to talk to my wife now. And 2 weeks later, I was in Winter Haven, Florida. Now here's a funny part of the story, and you had to know Jim Bagley. Jim Bagley is probably one of the greatest guys I ever knew. Took me under his wing, taught me a lot. So I show up I walk into the office, and I say, hi, I'm Lee Sisson, and the girl behind the desk says, okay. Jim has gone off. Now he's off doing something else, and he hadn't told anybody I'm going to show up. And so her name was Vivian Cutts, and she says, come on in. He says, yeah, Jim does stuff like this all the time, But I'm thinking, man, I just drove all the way down here, and I'm fixing to turn around and go back. But the rest was history. I started off, I was just a typical tournament fisherman down in Louisiana, and I wanted to, the way it started was I saw these balsa wood bank crankbaits came out, and I was catching a few fish on them, but I wanted something that would go a little bit deeper. And so I started fooling with it, and I made some really ugly stuff to begin with, trying to get baits down into the 15-foot range where I was fishing. It was a lake called False River, and they had a bunch of brush piles at the end of each docks. And the only way you could get down there at that time was with the worm, jigs, stuff like that, something that would sink to them. And that's where all the fish came from. But I wanted something I could fish faster, so I just kept fooling with different things, and finally came up with what became the DB3. But imagine being the only person in the world that's got a bait that'll run deeper than 6 feet. Now, I was kind of tough in tournaments at the time.
So, you know, you took probably what was the body design of a B3, right? And what got you to put that lip straight out the nose? I mean, because that's the key to getting that bait deep, right? Yeah,
well, I put it at maybe just a few degrees down. If it goes straight out, it'll go deeper, but it's harder to control. And some of the lures do go straight out. Some of the different lures go straight out, and I've done a pretty good job with them. But for me, I'd give up a little bit of depth to get more control over it and get that wandering action that I want. But anyway, yeah, I was able to just trial and error. There was a lot of error before the trial really got started. But just working with it, I just kept on doing it until it started working right.
So were you taking B3s, or were you carving your own stuff?
I was carving my own. The original one looked like it was mad all the time, because I brought out the balsa wood up underneath the lip out to where the wire was, because I thought it needed the support, so it looked like it had a big lower jaw, mad all the time. And then finally I realized that I didn't need to do that. I had that wire running under there, and that would help support it. And actually finally found I didn't even need that with the Lexan that we were using. But it was just determination, I guess.
So how did you get to putting the lead button in the lip?
That was something that we did. The lead button, like a lot of things that happen, I'd like to say, hey, yeah, that was a great idea right from the start, but it was a way, actually, it started off as a way to hold the wire in place.
Okay.
But the lead button actually helped in the way it ran also.
Yeah, because it actually...
Right.
Yeah. And then, but you got rid of it because it was...
Well, we moved away from it because originally we were punching the lips out of Lexan, and there wasn't a way to hold it in there. Then after that, we started molding the lips, and we were able to actually get the hole in the right spot with that slot that held the wire that goes down, so it would hold the wire in the right spot. And we were able to get away from it, but I honestly believe that the ones with the lead button work better.
I agree with that too, because I remember vividly when it went from that lead. It was a tuning button, is what Bagley called it.
Yeah, and that's what it was for, us to be able to tune it. One of the things that we used an annealed stainless wire. Well, we started off using brass, and then we moved to an annealed stainless. The brass is a little bit softer, so you can bend it back and forth. A lot of companies use a hardened steel, and it starts wallowing out the plastic. And so when we went to the other one, we still had to use an annealed stainless. When we went to the stainless, anneal being it's just not hardened, it's softer.
Right. So the first baits that you designed, or when you first got there, were you doing bait design at the beginning?
Well, at first we were having some problems with paint crack, and anybody that's old and used old Bagleys, the paint, what would happen is that paint would get brittle, and then the balsa wood would swell just a little bit when it got wet, and it would cause it to crack. And so I was trying to figure out some new ways to get the paints done. But I was also still building, tinkering with building lures. And There was a guy by the name of John Fox that used to have a TV show. He was kind of a popular guy back during that era. And I had given him some lures before I moved down here. I'd seen him at his in-store. And he just happened to be one of Jim's, one of the guys that Jim promoted. Well, he calls on the phone one day and says, "How come y'all hadn't built that Divin bait yet?" And well, first thing is Vivian comes out and says, "John Fox is on the phone, wants to talk to you." And Jim says, "I'll be there in a minute." And he says, "No, he wants to talk to Lee." And Jim comes, because I'd been there every bit of like 3 months, you know.
Yeah.
I'm still don't have a clue what's going on, and you know, we're all kind of in the getting to know each other phase. And so I go in, and John says, "Well, why hadn't you made that Divin bait yet?" He says, "I'm killing them on. I need some more." I said, "Well, Jim's got me working on the paints and stuff, you know." And I mean, I'm gonna tell Jim Bagley what he needs to do, sure.
Yeah.
And so he says, "Well, man, I'm killing." He says, "You got any more?" I said, "Yeah, I got some. I'll just send them out to you." And all of a sudden, I
They
hear
were a prototype at the time.
Well, these were the ones that I was building, you know, back in Louisiana.
Oh, okay.
And all of a sudden, Jim starts talking. Well, what I didn't know is he had picked up the phone and was listening to this conversation. He says, "What bait you talking about?" And John says, "Man, that Divin bait he's got." She says, "Y'all got to build that." And so I went out that afternoon and started building what became DB3s. Probably the first, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 baits that I built were baits that I was building in Louisiana. The Killer B series and the BB2s, because I'd shortened them down. And at the time when I went there, Jim had the Bangalore, the BB4, and the BB3.
Right.
And
so you came up with the BB2 and the BB1 then?
Yeah.
And the DB1 and the DB2.
You know, and again, I would like to take credit for an awful lot of this stuff. As the machine we had, the way it worked, you were chasing the length of it all the time. And one day I looked in the box and there's these little short baits that had come out, and I thought, I can make a bait out of that. You know, so I would like to say that, yeah, I designed that, but the kind of machine designed it and I just put it together.
That's cool.
Yeah.
What about the Honeybee series?
That was the hardest bait I ever had to make. In crankbaits, the bigger it is, the easier it is to get to work. It's just not as critical.
Yeah.
The smaller it gets, the harder it is to get to work. And we got the honeybee. Now that was probably the first bait that wasn't in the lures that I had built, you know, before I went to work for Jim. And I got the shallow lipped one to run right.
Yeah.
One of the things that we had a 93% out of the box, and at that time, a lot of the plastic lures, you had to tune. Not like today. Today, listen, plastic lures, they've come a long ways. They're making some really good plastic lures. But at the time, the plastic lures, you almost had to tune every one of them. And our goal was to make it 97% on all the lures, and that one was hitting like the shallow one was okay. We started making the diving one, and I could not get it to. It was like 87%, you know, and you'd end up having to tune it. Yeah, we couldn't put a lead tuning button like we used to because it was just too heavy. You know, bait was too small, so we put a grommet in there and tried to do the same thing with the. But it was just tough, and I went in one day and into Jim's office and said, "Man, I just can't." You know, Jim keeps saying, you know, win, you know, because it was like I'd had 3 days, you know. Jim thought this stuff, you know, he's the one that started that deal about, you know, the impossible, wait till tomorrow.
Yeah.
That was Jim.
But then, I mean, you have this honeybee that instantly goes out and...
Well, what happens is I go in Jim's office and you know, I just can't get him to run true every time. And Jim says, he pulls out this thing, we got an order for 100,000 of them. and so that one never did run as true as the rest of them, but they still caught a lot of fish.
Yeah, I won a club tournament back in 1980 in
there was a guy
Bassmaster Classic.
Bassmaster, right
Some
after
guy,
that.
with, I think his last name is Clun or something.
Yeah, something
right?
like that.
Yeah,
Yeah. So-
1976 on Guntersville, right? I mean, yeah, it was. That was an amazing bait, and then it wasn't made that because you went to the little bit after that, wasn't? Was that the progression or?
No, the Biddy Bee.
The Biddy Bee, yeah, that was.
What happened was the honeybee was the Biddy Bee. We were calling it the honeybee for a long time, and then there was some trademark, copyright infringement, and
Okay.
so we started calling it the Biddy Bee instead of the honeybee.
All right. Okay.